Siabo. Siabo. There are only two people in this room who will believe that during my heydays as a student, I was capable of doing what these young men did. Don't look at me now. Imagine me then. And those two individuals happen to be sitting together now, Lawrence and Professor Kai. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session. I greet you all. And I also extend my greetings to former President Mahama in absentia. I'm sure he will be coming back. Thank you very much. I know that it's almost graveyard session, and all of us are looking forward to a very short session. And I promise to give you one of the shortest sessions. I will take the cue from Professor Serote. I will follow the process that he has followed. I will allow speakers to introduce themselves when they speak. But for now, let me introduce the subject for discussion. It's African indigenous peace building and conflict transformation strategies in the promotion of peace and security on the continent. But perhaps let me set the scene by prefacing on what other authors have said. According to Hesse and Hwedie, including Rankopo of the University of Botswana, in their research paper on indigenous conflict, they say that a traditional conflict resolution process is a part of a well-structured, time-proven social system geared towards reconciliation, maintenance, and improvement of social relationships. That applies to individuals as well, and I think that's where the whole ideology of conflict resolution starts before you can make your contribution at the broader scale. The methods, process, and regulations are deeply rooted in the customs and traditions of people of Africa. The importance and utility of the process lie in the fact that they strive to, and this is very key for the young ones, they strive to restore a balance, to settle conflict, and eliminate disputes. I think it's important that you memorize this. Incidentally, Botswana and Ghana were studied during this research, and they were basically selected because they were primarily compatible to the model that was advocated for by the two authors. So I think that we also have a lot to learn from what Botswana and Ghana have done. But perhaps some of the issues that will emanate from discussions today is what is it that we have done as South Africa, particularly at the diplomatic level, in our international engagements, to ensure that we spread the narrative about the indigenous way of resolving conflict. And yesterday when I spoke about the role of diplomacy in IKS, I thought that that's another level that we should probably consider in future when we, convene a conference of this nature, because I think diplomats and diplomatic missions of South Africa have a very critical role to play, based on the fact that, South Africa has about 127 missions abroad, and we've got over 2,000 diplomats who are posted in those missions. And imagine each and every one of them attending for us where they are posted, preaching the gospel about indigenous knowledge systems, especially South African diplomats who are serving outside of the continent, but it does not exclude those who are serving in the continent. So I'm giving Professor Kaya a challenge, Professor Seleti. I've already given a thought to that. And I must also say that I feel very privileged, Professor Kaya, to be chairing a session on peace building and conflict resolution during a month when we celebrate the 101st birthday of a man whose name has become synonymous with our struggle for freedom and liberation, Tata Rolihlahla Mandela. Thank you very much for this rare opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, without wasting any time, I will allow speakers to introduce themselves in an order in which they have been listed, and then you'll tell us who you are, and you go straight to the point. And I'm going to, again, follow what Professor Sowale did. I will look you into the eye so that I can intimidate you Each speaker will have 5 minutes on the dot. I have a smartphone here, so nobody will cheat. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Let me say I stand on existing protocols. My name is Samuel Kale Eusi, originally from Cameroon. I'm a professor of Peace Studies and International Relations, and currently the director of the United Nations University for Peace Africa Regional Program. We are here to talk about African indigenous peace building and conflict transformation. I do not really have a presentation, but I will speak here and there and share some of our experiences as we work in the continent. We currently work with 28 universities in Africa, building programs in peace and conflict studies. But there are certain challenges we meet around the continent. And yesterday, one of the professors said that one of the things we're going to find as we engage in this path towards including indigenous knowledge systems or using indigenous knowledge systems in conflict resolution is resistance. And there are certain facts that must be stated. One of the facts is that Africa had and still has indigenous governance systems, and they had before Europeans ever stepped foot on the continent. It is a fact that Mungo Park did not discover River Niger. Africa had and still has indigenous methods of conflict resolution and peace building. The Gacaca in Rwanda has demonstrated that fact. African indigenous systems of conflict resolution are still relevant in the age of globalization. Let us look at this scenario. About 70% of violent conflicts in the world are in Africa. And there is a particular way conflicts are resolved in this continent. This particular way is that most organizations, or as well as the United Nations, don't care very much about conflict prevention. They are more focused on conflict resolution. And so when things are going so bad in a country, nobody cares. And then when it degenerates into violence, an envoy is sent, either by the United Nations or by the African Union or a regional economic community. This envoy meets the warring parties, and it eventually leads to a government of national unity. And then elections are organized. The transitional government is usually there to draw a new constitution and organize elections. When you scan through conflict resolution in the continent, you'll realize that there is approximately a 40% relapse in conflicts that have been resolved in that particular way. My book, which came from my PhD thesis supervised by Professor Kaya, was titled Burundi's Negative Peace. And when I launched the book at the Africa Union, the Burundian ambassador was very angry with me and said, "How can you say Burundi has negative peace?" And my conclusion was that Burundi was going to relapse within 5 to 10 years. And that was in 2010. And you know what happened in 2015. The challenge we really have is that we've been brainwashed into an inferiority complex, and we see everything about us as inferior. As a child, I grew up, for those of you who know Cameroon very well, we have about 80% French-speaking, 20% English-speaking. And the French system of colonialism was that when you start speaking good French, behave like a Frenchman, dress like a Frenchman, you are called an évolué, someone who has evolved. And then you can have the French citizenship. That's why you see the French national team is an African national team. And consequently, those of us who grow up in cities will always keep away from those children who came from the village who spoke the dialect. And because we saw them as primitive, backward, and native. And the Westerners are very good at using those words. Now, you would remember.
Prof, the time has evolved. I will give you extra minute.
1 minute, yes. Right, so let me use two quotations, which I'll just read and conclude. Now, you remember there's the Roman writer, Pliny, who said that, and he must have been familiar with the saying that ex Africa semper aliquid novi, that something always comes from Africa. And this is one of the things that's coming from Africa, the indigenous knowledge. And he says that of the Africans, there are diverse forms and kinds of men. Some in the East have neither noses nor nostrils, but the face is full. Others have no upper lip, but they are without tongues, and they speak like signs. And they have little hole to take their breath in and out. They drink with an oaten straw. Imagine how many Roman children will be scared when they say the Africans are coming. Now, a few years later, another Spaniard Moroccan, Leo Africanus, wrote, "The rich king of Timbuktu keeps a magnificent and well-furnished court. Here are the great store of doctors, judges, priests, and other learned men that are bountifully maintained at the king's cost and charges. And hither are brought diverse manuscripts or written books out of Barbary, which are sold for more money than any other merchandise." So these are the two faces of Africa, and I very much associate with Leo Africanus because that is what we actually have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. We can have the next speaker, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joram Tarusarira, and I'm Assistant Professor of Religion, Conflict, and Globalization and Peace Building at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I'm also the Director of the Center for Religion, Conflict, and Globalization, also in the Netherlands. In terms of practice between the university and society, I am very much involved in religion and diplomacy with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Dutch government, as well as the Swiss government. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I'm very proud African. That's why I always come back home to talk about these issues. My point of departure, ladies and gentlemen, is that each and every society across the world has had its own knowledge, its own principles, and its own systems for different aspects of life, including peace building and conflict transformation. Those who criticize indigenous knowledge systems are bound up in traditional modern dichotomy, in which traditional is interchangeably used with indigenous, and also the indigenous is equated or looked at as backward. So we operate on these binary divisions between traditional, modern, and so forth. And I think it was yesterday Professor Nkonto eloquently demonstrated the Cartesian epistemology that influences how we do our practice in terms of scholarship as well as in terms of practice. And I think this is very important because it is this period that we need to name that has really been baked into our minds in terms of how we think and how we practice. But at the center of peace building and conflict transformation in Africa is the restoration of relationships and building and strengthening of society. The focus is to set right a wrong in such a way as to restore harmony within the disturbed community. Harmony will not be restored unless the parties are satisfied that justice has been done. During and after conflicts, we are confronted with how best to deal with the painful legacy of past violence, while at the same time maintaining the fragile social harmony that often characterizes post-conflict societies. But the question is, should priority be given to bringing the perpetrators of past human rights violations to justice, thereby combating the culture of impunity, that has come to characterize many civil conflicts? Or is it more important to start focusing on measures designed to ensure that peace and stability, and with them the prospects for a country's longer-term recovery, are bolstered? In Africa, with the advent of so-called modernity, and I say so-called modernity because oftentimes when we talk about modernity, we often look at the positive side, but we also do not look at this dark side. And this is very important. It was mentioned yesterday that when you talk about modernity, always think about the negative side of it because it tends to be hidden all the time. So with the advent of modernity, traditional social mechanisms were undermined. Kofi Annan, the then United Nations Secretary General, highly acknowledged the role of traditional mechanisms in peace building and conflict transformation. In his report of 2004, titled Rule of Law and Transitional Justice in Conflict and Post-Conflict Societies, he said, and I quote him here, "Due regard must be given to indigenous and informal traditions for administering justice and settling disputes. While there are instances when formal and rational legalistic approaches, such as the criminal courts, are necessary, the effectiveness of policies that are community-initiated and community-driven should not be underestimated." Talking about rituals in relation to settling conflicts, it is important to realize that genuine acceptance of a ruling or of its articulation by the leaders is recognized as essential for the ending of hostilities between disputants. And we have also seen how music can be something that is soothing, that is uniting, and it has been a part and parcel for a long time of conflict prevention and conflict resolution. Now, compared to the rationalistic, legalistic approaches, the African way of long discussions and ritual events creates in principle more opportunities for exploring issues of accountability, innocence, and guilt that are integral to the legacy of violent conflict. African indigenous mechanisms create cultural social spaces that accommodate both victims and perpetrators. And I think this is very important, especially when we compare this to the rational legalistic approaches of dealing with conflict. I see the moderator's eye in my face. But I want to point it out that with African indigenous mechanisms, the idea is to accommodate both the victims and the perpetrators in facilitating the acknowledgement of wrongs and the validation of the experienced pain and loss with a view to achieving mutual coexistence of all parties affected. As I conclude, we can talk about many examples that all of you know. The Gacaca has been mentioned by the former speaker. If we go to Uganda, we might talk of Mato Opute, and colleagues here might attest to that. If we go to Mozambique, we might speak of the role of Magamba spirits in reconciliation, and colleagues might attest to that. We go across Africa, there are all these ways of dealing with conflict.
Good morning. My name is Valerie Ferim. I'm the head of the Department of Political Science and International Relations in the University of Fort Hare. I'm going to try and thunder through my presentation as fast as possible and try to avoid the eyes of the chair. So we've had numerous discussions over the past day and part of today about the existence of indigenous knowledge systems on the African continent long before the advent of the modern state. We've had lots of discussions about how Africa used to assert itself in the past and all the great empires of Western Sudan, of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and Egypt. But my question is, why are we still at the bottom of the food chain? And I'm going to try to do not a prescriptive discussion, but going to try and attempt to do a diagnosis of why Africa still finds itself in where it finds itself today. And to do that, I'm going to try as quickly as possible to thunder through 3 theoretical propositions which try to explain the plight of the African continent. And the first one is a modernization theory. The theory states that following the independence of the African continent, we are going to try to adopt Western values. Our primitive traditional societies are going to be replaced with Western science. And I'm sure that's the reason why most Africans would, or a good number of Africans would prefer to wear that drive that German car or wear that French, Italian suit, or drink French wine as opposed to adopting indigenous knowledge systems. So the strength behind Western civilization is not the F-35 fighter planes or the aircraft carriers. It is the attractiveness of its civilization. It's the fact that Africans desire the pleasures offered by the West. That's the reason why we find ourselves where we find that we are today. Now, the second theoretical proposition is the dependency theory. And the theory argues that it blames external forces for the plight faced by the African continent. It argues that there are external forces which are bent on the ongoing exploitation of the African continent. That Africa provides the raw materials, Africa provides the market, Africa provides the cheap labor that fuels and sustains high standards of living in Europe. I mean, there was a row a couple of years ago about the Americans insisting on dumping chicken feet and head in the South African market. And they even threatened to kick South Africa out of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, if they don't allow the GMOs to be imported onto the African continent. So the dependency theorists argue, and one professor mentioned about the book written by Walter Rodney in 1972, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. That's basically one of the frameworks behind the dependency theory. The theory argues that attempts by Africans to resist Western imperialism are usually being met by military intervention, by economic sanctions. And cases that come to mind, Zimbabwe, for instance, since for the past 20 years, they have been under Western imposed sanctions, which has basically crippled the economy. In 2011, Gaddafi was ousted in power because of NATO intervention, imposed a no-fly zone. And other case studies, Laurent Gbagbo of Cote d'Ivoire was basically removed from power by the French under the guise of protecting their citizens. And the list goes on. Thomas Sankara, 1987, Patrice Lumumba, even the CIA itself was behind supporting the apartheid regime during the days of the Cold War. Then the last theory, which I'm going to quickly conclude with, is a status quo. And someone asked the question, I think Professor Nkondlo asked the question yesterday, that who is to blame? And I think as Africans, we're also supposed to take part of the responsibility. And the status quo argues that it looks at the inner workings of the state on the African continent. We blame slavery, we blame colonialism, we blame apartheid. We blame Van Riebeeck coming to the shores of South Africa in 1652. Where do we take the blame ourselves? Most of what is happening on the African continent, we always celebrate civilization started in Africa. Fire was discovered in Africa. The oldest human fossils were found on the African continent. And then what happened? What happened to those civilizations? Why didn't we colonize Europe? Why didn't we invade the Americas? Why are we still at the bottom of the food chain? It's because our leaders have sold us out. If even slavery itself wasn't possible, couldn't have been possible without the collusion of our leaders. They sold our own people for what? Light beer or blue jeans. So basically, we have leaders who believe that it's only through the continuation in power would the national agenda, as they choose to define it, be served. That's the reason why we've got long-serving leaders. Former President Mahama here talked yesterday about these leaders. He didn't name names, but you've got countries like Uganda, Cameroon, Eswatini. Most of the young people behind there, in Cameroon, for instance, since 1982, the president has been in power since 1982. Theodore Obiang Nguema, since 1979, he's been the leader of that country. They are the ones who are continuing to corrode and degenerate peace and security on the African continent. So as Africans, we should also take responsibility rather than continuously blaming Western powers for our own faults. Thank you.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joyce Mieza. I come from University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm the library and special collections director. My talk is going to be very practical. The talk is about peace and security. When I think peace, the first thing that comes into mind is something positive. There is no way you can build peace if you're not going to be positive in any spheres of trying to build peace. So from my angle as a librarian, this is where I start. How West sees Africa. I'm going to use an example of a British library. If you go to a British library, you will find that it has got a vast collection from Africa. So what does that say to you? It says the West sees us, they have value, and they used the collection to advance. So that's why even today, if you go abroad, you will see all of these museums that displays things that are coming from Africa. So why am I saying this? In all its honesty, if we want to build peace in Africa and advance indigenous knowledge systems, Africa should begin to do the very same that West did. So we need to just find what is it that is positive about West that we can take with us so as to build. Okay, now, if I'm talking about what is it that we need to look at, let's just look at on building foundation. Let's take the language. We are already advanced. I'm standing here, I'm speaking in English. I also speak in isiZulu and I also speak in isiXhosa. So I'm turning the situation around. I'm not blaming why there was colonization, but I'm rather saying I'm far ahead of an English person who can't speak any language other than English. So to me, that's where we start the building phase. It's like just take something that is positive out of the West. The next thing that I just want to do, I just want to use an example. Indigenous knowledge systems. I've been very, very lucky to work with Professor Kaya, and I don't see Maheshri, but it's a great team of people that are doers rather than talkers. One big example, not so long from now, you will be seeing a collection of its kind. What have they done that we've been doing together? We've just looked and we said we can digitize. We can create a collection that is so unique, that is from Africa, that is indigenous, but that will follow all the proper steps. Because what we identified was that what differentiates West from us is that in African continent, we are known to be like oral people. Everything is sitting in our head. So what we've just been doing with Professor Kaya and Maheshri is just to say, let's sit down, let us just create a process where our collection is going to be refined. Before you digitize now, it's going to be peer-reviewed. So in the near future, just brace yourself because you will be seeing that collection coming from Indigenous Knowledge Center. So to me, these are things that I think when we're just committed to building the future of indigenous knowledge systems, it's high time that we need to have things that we're going to showcase and say, what have we taken from the West to just build the future? What have we taken from colonization to build who we are? If West sees us and appreciate us, I can assure you, you can challenge them and say, if they really don't value Africa, they must bring back all the collection that is abroad. They won't. Trust me, they won't, because you wouldn't display anything in your house if it wasn't of the value. Thank you so much.
Giving all honor and praises to the great ones who have brought us here in this moment. Giving all honor and praises to the mothers, fathers of Africa's liberation, who today their footstep is which we stand in. Giving all honor and praises to those who are yet to come, because Sankofa tells us you can't go forward until you have looked back. And as you look back, you build the present for the forward. So this is where I'm going. I'm not going to use my intellectual hat. Some years ago, I was appointed by Minister Mtetwa to look at social cohesion and nation building, and I decided under the tutelage of Judge Yvonne Makoro that I didn't want to just become one of those academics that's thinking about social cohesion. I had all the integrity to be an advocate because I come from a home where we speak a few languages. I come from a home where there are myriads of us in that situation. But I'm putting my attention to you. There was an emperor called Haile Selassie. He's just on 117th birthday. When he addressed the United Nations, he said this: until the philosophy that holds one race superior than another is finally and permanently disbanded, there'll be war. Until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, there'll be war. Until there are no more upper class, superior races, there'll be war. Until the basic rights that are guaranteed to every humankind, until those are guaranteed, there'll be war. Give thanks. When His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, the founder, one of the founding fathers of the organization, and please write that down, because one of the things academics like to do is to wish away some of the leaders, whether they like them or not. But Haile Selassie gave the land that the AU sits on. Haile Selassie gave the staff that the AU is still using to today. So I want you to remember one of those founding fathers. But let me bring the hat of a cultural activist, because one of the things that we negate is that culture creates peaceful situations. It was Bob Marley who says, when the music hits you, you feel no pain. But Peter Tosh says in his song, there will be no peace until there's equal rights and justice. Write those names down, because I want you to know that the cultural activists have been the custodians of peace and have been the frontline soldiers. When we go to Morogoro and when we go to different parts, if you don't have a song, President Kagame was reminding us 2 weeks ago, if you don't have a song in the liberation, you have nothing. Because the Africa needs vibration. It needs a song. It needs something that will push it to come together. The women of Kenya, the Kikuyu women, recently, 2017, their men were abusing them, and they started playing music that will help women who have been beaten the night before to try and come out of her dilemma. But they went a step forward. Not only did they find a song, but they found a dance of defense, because they said, we will have peace in this community. Not only did these Kikuyu women form song and dance, when the men continued to abuse them, they now build their own villages. Are you there? So the idea of peacefulness is something that women are taking very serious. So in my paper that I did a couple years ago on the African Renaissance called Woman-centricism, I said, women of Africa, we are not going to even start discussing who is a feminist or not. Let us rewrite our position in upholding and being custodian and peace. And so woman-centricism says the African woman must be centrifugal to everything that happens in her community. And because she's at the center of her community, she can be both the peacemaker and the warrior. The name I've been given, Yaa Asantewaa, is about a woman who the only way she could keep peace in her community is to cut the head of the white man. And symbolically, I will not stop doing that. But the point we're making, that she also created peace because the men got tired, and she says, let's get the men together. Why am I saying all of this? Because I want you to understand that the African is not homogeneous to one peace accord. We find ways, and we always acted out of necessity. We always acted out of possibility, and we always acted out of impossibility. And so as young people, the challenge as we talk about restoring and preserving peace, the South African youth must sustain social cohesion, which means that everyone born in this country must find a role in creating inclusivity. Every one of you born in this country must know Outcomes 14, which says we are on the road to nation building. How do we create nation building when there is xenophobia? How do we create nation building when every day South Africa prides itself that women are raped, 3 women every minute? How do we create peace? How do we create peace? You young people, when in your own classrooms you are beating teachers, the ones who you must also honor. So we have to sit and think. As we come here in these academic spaces, what are the ways that you as a South African citizen creates peace? Siyabonga.
Let me take this opportunity to express great appreciation to all the speakers. You have done very well. Congratulations to yourselves. This is the part where we have to clap hands. Well, I think there are a few points that we can take home today, especially the young ladies and gentlemen. We now know that Africa still has indigenous conflict resolution methods, and they remain relevant. And that we must refrain or desist from a reactive way of resolving conflict. And this is what Professor Ewusi was saying, that the model used by the West is more reactive because they want to make sure that out of conflict there are dividends for reaction so that they get involved. And that each society has its own principles and systems. So it is important that we retain ours for posterity, for yourselves. And it is in the best interest of the next generation after yourselves to make sure that you live that. Some of us are, well, I can't say I'm old now. Professor Kaya is giving me a very intimidating look. Well, some of us are getting old, so it's important that we leave some of these legacies for posterity. Dr. Ferim, modernization theory, dependency theory, but I think what was cherry on top from what you said and the break from, most of the speeches was that you spoke about French champagne, something that many of us are addicted to. And it has become a symbol of status. You know that they say in Nigeria is the biggest consumer of French champagne. And again, in Nigeria, a rich person can order pizza from London and collect it from the airport. But that's not literal, it's figurative. It illustrates the extent or the veracity of wealth in that country. But I think what I also found very profound and quite unexpected was what Ms. Mieza said, and I gave her a few minutes because of my own selfishness, that we should not completely erode what the West has left for us. We must pick a few lessons that we think work for us. And it is important for us, as much as it is important for them to keep our literature and spy on us, it is important for us as well to see what it is that we can use out of what they have written. And it is quite pleasing that she's working on very new collections. And I think many of the collections will actually achieve the same objective that she has mentioned. My dear sister, the wisdom of Haile Selassie, I think it has been had. And the battle between Bob Marley and Peter Tosh, and most importantly, from Jamaica to Morogoro, Africa needs to have sounds. Africa needs to hear the beats. We have to sing indigenous knowledge systems. We have to be agents of indigenous knowledge systems. I hope that when we leave here, we will not close our books. We will not get rid of our notes to gather dust at home. We will go back home to reflect on what has been discussed in the past 2 days, reconvene again, apply our minds, and try and find solutions to the complex challenges that continue to face us. Only us can determine the destiny of the continent.
Since it's the first time most of us have heard about this Pan-African conference, my question is, since the Pan-African conference has started, how has it helped build and change our Africa?
Good morning to all. My name is Natishen. I'm from Apollo Secondary School in Chatsworth. I want to speak about education, as it's a very important thing to us youth. In many African countries, we use European education system. And I want to know, as Africa, isn't it would be great if Africa we come up with our own education system, which will help us to learn our cultures and our languages. Now in school, we are doing Romeo and Juliet. We are doing Macbeth, which is Shakespeare, which are European ideologies, and which are all written in European cultures. which are all written in European cultures and their ideas. When are we gonna learn? When are we gonna start about our African books? There are many writers all across Africa, from Nigeria to here in South Africa. When are we gonna be able to learn those books, the African books? Thank you.
Camakwin. Siyakhuleka emakhosini, siyakhuleka edlozini. Igama ngibizo Master's Candidate in Gender Studies UKZN. Umbuzo wam ngulona. We always speaking about social cohesion, but none of us are speaking about spiritual restoration in the African continent, knowing exactly what our ancestors have done in the past, including the raping of women. For example, if I can go on, you can allow me, I'm a descendant of Amampondomise. Amampondomise ngamatholo omthwakazi. Ukuze kube ngamatholo omthwakazi, kwalandukwa kwaliwa imfazwe phakathi kwamampondomise nesizwe salanduka sabathwa nabathwakazi, and then inzala yamampondomise, which is amatholo omthwakazi, abakhona. Now that was done forcefully. Now can you then tell me as African children that the spirits of those women who were coerced and raped and became wives of Amampondomise are resting in peace? Thank you.
Good day to one and all. My name is Amanda Fumba. I attend Wingen Heights Secondary School. And the item that myself and my schoolmates here have chosen for today is a poem that we titled, The Africa We Want for Our Generation and the Next. Africa is rich, Africa is pure. The talent that our people have cannot be sold. We share history, heritage, culture, and resources, and that on its own lands a mark on the globe. The Africa we want is one built on unity, where xenophobia is a foreign story. Let's do it for us and the Africans to come. That is the Africa we want for our generation and the next. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bianca Patha I'm from Ferndale Secondary School. My question for today is, I know my school has brought up a similar question to this, but I wanted to know, other than bringing about awareness, how has this conference bring about change for the future?
I'm really happy that the young ladies got the courage to come here and speak, because the conference has achieved that thing, that you dare to ask the elders, what are you really saying? And what are we supposed to do? So I'm throwing it back at you. How are you gonna take from this conference and make sure your young people that you are not here today can benefit from your knowledge that you have? Because in Africa, we say each one teach one. On the question of Pan-Africanism, we are only the benefactors of over 110 years of Pan-African activities. This IKS is one of the babies that came out of many gatherings of Pan-Africanism. What you need to do and what Africology does is that in order for you to continue in our course, you have to study the map of Africa, one, and you have to be able to tell me the names and the countries without even faltering. And second, you go through 3 weeks of basic Pan-Africanism for beginners. And the reason is that we take nothing for granted that every African understands the language of Pan-Africanism. It is because of Pan-Africanism that women like myself dare to think that we can form our own institute and teach from the Pan-African thought. The idea of Pan-Africanism, students, is Pan-Africa, for Africa. The word pan means for Africa, which means in your ideals, in your spirituality, in your food, in your culture, in what you wear. Your prism and your spectrum is for Africa, about Africa, on the issues of Africa. So this is in a nutshell, but I'm really saying to you, bring me to your school and I will break down Pan-Africanism to you. It's not a very difficult subject. On spirituality, I'm not a Christian, I don't go to church. One of the things that I had to do as a Pan-African is understand that religion has caused us a lot of disharmony. And President Mahama is a very key leader of that, where he changed his role as a Muslim to become Christian. and won the elections. And we must ask him why he did it that way. But the point I'm making that I chose not to follow religion, I follow tradition. I'm a Glozis. It's important that I always call on my ancestors. And I'm unapologetic that every morning I get into my office, I burn Mpepo, and I thank them for even delivering me to that space that I'm in today. And I'm not an ordained healer. I've never been through any training. But it's a decision. Yesterday, I said to you, choose your agency. If you're gonna be good at being spiritual, don't complain about the other, because you have an agency that has come to you as an African. But here's the key. Be consistent, be committed, but do it with excellence. The word that evades us today is solidarity. Africans have not, in the liberation, we used to talk about solidarity. Today we talk about this thing of social inclusion and social cohesion. But social cohesion gets its formation from the Pan-African movement, which says solidarity first and then everything else after. Thank you.
I would like to highlight that same query, it's still standing with the issue of decolonization, which I think we've seen it as a big movement. It sits with the collection. It sits with, if we were to wake up tomorrow and say we did colonizing the curriculum, we just don't have an African curriculum, do we have everything in place? Hence, earlier on when I was speaking, I said we need a body of doers, people who are just going to do what is needed. We need a collection, we need publishers who will publish in African content and stuff like that. So I think that's what is so far missing. But if we start now and do, and all do, the chances are 5 years from now we will be talking something different. Thank you.
I want to talk about the issue of Pan-Africanism. There's a paper I published 2 years ago where I grappled with this exact issue. Who are we uniting? Are we uniting black people? Are we uniting people on the African continent where the white people fit? South Africa has a very variety of races. And what is the purpose of this unity? Is it for the sake of being one black nation or one African nation? Is it about free movement of people? Is it about having a common market? Is it about having a union government? So it's not something that started now. It started over 100 years ago. And its objectives have changed in different phases of the movement. Be it against the anti-colonial struggle, which played a very instrumental role. There were a series of Pan-African congresses that culminated in, from 1945, the Manchester Conference that called for the total liberation of the African continent. And now we are pushing for a United States of Africa, as espoused by people like Kwame Nkrumah, who talked about Africa must unite. So it's not something which we expect to see results now. It's a whole civilization which takes centuries to be established. Europe, Western imperialism and dominance didn't happen overnight. A civilization is not established in total on the spot. It takes time. So it's about transmitting knowledge to future generations to be aware of their history, to be aware of their cultures, to be aware of their societies, so that in a couple of hundreds of years to come, hopefully, we are going to have that reawakening of the African giant that we have been talking about, that happened in those empires hundreds of years ago. Thank you.
I just want to take one question, the one on religion. What I just want to bring to our attention is that this category called religion is an invention. There is nothing, if you go into the history of ideas, that you can identify as religion. Religion is a category that developed since the 4th century, went into the 14th century, now into the 19th century. It was changing its meaning and reference over time. When it came over, the category religion, it actually was being used to differentiate between people, and those who did not have a religion were to be the inferior ones, and those who had religion were the superior ones. But now we deploy the category religion as if it is something that is instinctive, that is natural, that has been there over time. There is actually nothing that you can actually place your finger on and say this is religion. In the 4th century, religion simply meant that which you did with passion. If drinking water was something that you did consistently all the time, that was your religion. So what I want to bring to our understanding is that the deployment and the working with the category religion, as we have it today, needs a deconstruction. It is part of coloniality, and it is part of what has brought this difference that is a problem between us amongst us. Religion doesn't exist.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just highlight a few things about on the question of what has Pan-Africanism achieved. It has achieved a lot, as Professor Tessa said yesterday. It is not an event, it's a process, and it is changing very fast. One of the things he said yesterday regarding the forum of former heads of state, I was intrigued by some of the criteria, democratic entry and democratic exit. And I told Dr. Valerie Ferim, I said, nobody from Central African region would be there because we only have live presidents. So in spite of that, a lot of things are changing. President Mahama said yesterday that he implemented visa-free. You go to Rwanda, it's visa-free. You go to Ethiopia, it's visa-free. But let me tell you a short story. We invited someone, a lady, a Rwandese, about 5 years ago from Belgium to come and facilitate a course in Addis Ababa. She got to Addis Ababa thinking because she was a Rwandese, she would just get a visa in, and she was denied entry. And we rushed to the Foreign Affairs and Immigration to try to get her in from morning till about 3 p.m. Then I just asked her, do you have another passport? She said, yes, I have a Belgian passport. I said, go and show it. She went there and she was allowed in. This is someone who had been out, who has been stuck at the airport for morning. It was the same person. Just the fact that she had a different passport. I did an experiment in my class in Costa Rica. I did the same experiment in my class in Spain, and I did it in my class in Mogadishu. I had the same response. I asked the students, I said, everybody should write one word that comes to their mind when you see the word Africa. And I can tell you that across the board, whether it was in Europe, Central America, and Africa, it was conflict, poverty, hunger, underdevelopment. And it reminded me of Professor Kondlo's presentation in the Africa Dignity Forum in Addis, that we have imbibed the vocabulary of the oppressor, to a point where we have been told how stupid we are so many times, and the moment they ask you, who are you, you say, I am stupid. I'll stop there.
Good afternoon. My name is Menzi Herimbanda. I'm from Ferndale Secondary School. The question I have for today is, our speakers speak about eradicating xenophobia, corruption, and prejudice. What solutions have they come up with to put an end to these problems?
I think this conference is part of an educational process. It takes education for people to know. Once we know our African history, it's going to help us to shun issues of xenophobia. A case in point, the rest of the world already treats us as one. I remember the first time I went to the US, a friend came to pick me with his American girlfriend, and she said, oh, Kale is from Africa. I said, no, I'm from South Africa. Then I was working in South Africa. The world treats us as one. We hear EU Africa, China Africa, India Africa, US Africa. So to them, Africa is a country. And going back to that friend of mine, he said, oh, you say you are from South Africa. I have a friend in Ghana. Do you know him? So I mean, the moment in Africa, we are already one, and we need to know that the rest of the world treats us as one.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, I think this will be the end of this session, which seemed to have generated a lot of questions. And please allow me to close this session at this stage. I think it's time for lunch. To our panelists, thank you very much for your insightful contributions, and to the students, thank you very much.